Hello. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about student engagement and looking at some student engagement techniques. This seems to be a real buzzword in higher education today, but it really is an important term for us to consider in online education. When I was doing my research for this lecture, I realized that not everyone has the same definition of student engagement. So in this lecture, I'm going to attempt to pull together some of the main researchers and come up with a single definition that we can use for student engagement. Everyone assumes that we're talking about the same thing, but when asked for definitions, either we're hard-pressed to come up with an answer, or each person has a slightly different reflection on the term. If you were asked to explain what student engagement is, especially in an online class, what would you say? I think it's a term that means the students are involved in the learning. But let's begin with a definition that comes from the research. And what they say is that student engagement is students' mental focus on the topic, active participation with that content, and a collaborative experience. The definition also continues to mean something like an emotional commitment to the learning. So when you're engaged on a particular topic in your course, do you feel an emotional involvement? If you do, then you are engaged as a learner. Let's take that definition one step farther. So we can define student engagement as students involved in the course activities in a setting where high-quality learning is possible. So students can be engaged, but if they're not in a comfortable setting, if they're not in a community of learners where they can share that information, that engagement may not be at the level that we want. Okay, now we have a definition that we can probably all agree upon, that it's students' emotional and active involvement in the learning is what student engagement is going to mean in this particular lecture and in this course. But how do we make sure that engagement happens? I want to give you 10 techniques that are not just for online learning. They can be used in a traditional classroom, a hybrid classroom, and also in an online classroom. The first technique is that we need to help students believe in themselves and believe in their ability to learn. There's really no agreement that I could find in the research as to what motivates students to be engaged. But the dominant view is that students engage when they act as their own learning agents. They're working to achieve their own goals. This means that students believe in themselves as learners, and that's very important. They have to understand that they have the ability to learn the material that's being presented to them. They must believe that they can learn, that they have the necessary background and the necessary skills to have that learning occur. And they have to be able to overcome past failures. Sometimes those past failures can stand in the way of future learning. And so we have to help students begin to believe in themselves. And we can do that by giving some control to the students over their learning and helping them develop their own confidence. The second technique is to provide support services. And you might think, well, gee, students don't usually take much advantage of those support services. They don't use the writing lab. They seldom use the library. They do most of their work online. That can be true. But students see that when an institution does offer those services, that that institution is caring and supporting their learning. We also must make sure that the tech support is a strong and vibrant support system. Students will use tech support. So we want that support to be easy to understand, easy to access, and the students need to feel comfortable in doing that. The next step, number 3, is to provide opportunities for students to work alone. Now, we know from the adult theory of andragogy, which you're going to be covering in courses within this program, that adults enjoy working by themselves and having their own goals. But we also know that adults enjoy learning relationships with others. They must feel competent to achieve their own objectives, but they have to be able to have an opportunity to share that new knowledge and to verify that knowledge with others. So having students collaborate, having students being engaged is really an important technique in learning today. There's one more point I wanted to make about allowing students to work on their own, and that is the focus of this technique is really cultivating intrinsic motivation, which fosters self-determination, which leads to engagement. So let me say that one more time. If students have the opportunity to work by themselves and to reach their own goals, this cultivates intrinsic motivation. They feel like they are in charge of their learning, which fosters that self-determination and leads to engagement. This is very important, especially in online learning. The fourth one is that teachers or professors or instructors are really at the heart of student engagement. One study found that if a teacher is perceived as approachable, as well prepared, and sensitive to the needs of the students, then the students in that class are more committed to work harder and to get more out of their learning. So that empathy with the students, that understanding of the students' needs that comes through the approach that an instructor has, especially in an online classroom, is something that might seem like it's behind the scenes, but it really does add to student engagement. If you think back to some of the classes that you've had and some of your favorite professors, aren't they the ones that you thought you could talk to? Aren't they the ones that answered your questions quickly and completely? Aren't those teachers the ones that really got you involved in the content? So our fourth one again is that teachers are really the heart of student engagement. The fifth technique that I want to talk about is adapting to changing student expectations. Student engagement is not something that's stagnant. A student doesn't just come to a class engaged. And that engagement can raise up and lower down throughout the class. The technology plays a role in this change as well, because if the student doesn't feel comfortable with the technology, their engagement is not going to be high. If they do feel like they really understand how to use the technology, how to navigate around in their course, how to get their questions answered, that helps with student engagement. As students change and new evidence emerges, instructional practices have to be adjusted. We can't teach the same way in an online class that we taught 3 years ago. The technology is different, and even the needs of our students are different. So to engage them, we have to keep up with the times. Number 6 is to enable students to be active citizens. Education's goal is to create active citizens for the future of the country. To do that, students need to learn how to participate in activities around them in their community and also in their learning community, and also to be able to contribute to those activities. Engagement for students goes beyond strategies, beyond techniques, beyond behaviors. Engagement is a concept in which students participate actively in their own learning. They have a voice and they have an emotional attachment to the path that they are taking through that new learning that's taking place. As we move on to the 7th technique for engaging our students, we see that it's necessary to create learning that is active, it's collaborative, and it fosters learning relationships. We just learned about activity and learning, but let's take it outside the classroom just a minute. Employers are looking for people to hire who can collaborate, right there within the office and solve problems or help to find solutions, but they're also looking for the same kind of employees who can collaborate and be actively engaged in solving a problem globally. When students share information, they're actively engaged in the learning. And to just give you a little personal aside on that, I was recently talking with a person who works for Boeing. And while Boeing has their main plant in the state of Washington, they also have plants around the world. One of them, this person happened to tell me about, was in Toulouse, France. So the people in the Seattle branch have to be able to create learning and create solutions and become actively engaged in solving the problems of building the newest airliners from an office in Seattle or an office in Toulouse, France. The next technique that engages students is fairly obvious, and that's creating educational experiences for students that are challenging and enriching and that extend their academic abilities. Easy learning activities and assignments are not as effective as engaging the student. When we challenge a student, we're trying to get them to move up in their learning and move up in their capabilities. When students are reflecting, they're questioning, they're evaluating, they're making connections between past knowledge and new knowledge, they are engaged. This is where you have to know the abilities of your students, though. So you need to know the current level for each one of the students that you teach, and then help to make activities that are challenging for that individual student. You want to make sure that every student is engaged, and that's not always easy to do, but it happens when you get to know your community of learners. The ninth technique is to enable students to develop their own sense of community. As we already know, when students have a sense of belonging, they have active relationships with others in the class, and they understand or feel comfortable with how things are working around them and working for them within the class, they're much more likely to be engaged. For example, if students understand how to navigate the learning management system in their online class, they know where to post their discussion, they know where to deposit their papers, they know where to get the feedback. They suddenly have a more sense of community. They feel like they belong because they understand the surroundings that are in that class. So when we enable students to develop their own community, that starts with making sure they understand how to navigate that community. And when they do, then they can start to form relationships. They can start to share information with others because they feel more comfortable. Our final technique for engaging students is to provide a welcoming attitude in all aspects of the institution. To become engaged, students must feel that they're accepted and affirmed. They must feel that they belong at the institution. And as we've talked about this before, that starts really with maybe admissions, that might start with financial aid, that it certainly starts in the classroom with that instructor. The instructor has to welcome the students and has to affirm that they belong there and that their goals are going to be met and their questions are going to be answered. This sense of belonging really has to come from all areas of the institution. And I think one of the most important places, and I've said this before, is in tech support. When you call tech support for help, oftentimes we're calling because something is not working and we really don't know how to fix it. And so that sense of uneasiness has to be calmed by the people who are in that role. They have to have a welcoming attitude and a can-do attitude to make that student know that the solution is coming soon. Okay, we've talked about 10 different techniques that might be used to engage students. And in a future lecture in this class, I'm going to be talking about the future of engagement and how we have to look at the skills that students of today are going to need in the future so they can be actively involved, engaged citizens. So at the end of this lecture, right now, I'm going to just provide you again with that list of the 10 steps or the 10 techniques for engaging students. And as you read through this review, I'd like you to think on each slide or each screen how you might engage students in that way.